Good afternoon, 7th grade. It is Thursday, April 9th, and we are on page 363, 23.4, the end of World War II. Now, before we begin this, you have a quiz 36 today to do, so you can either pause the video and do it now, or you can wait till the end of the video and then do it afterwards. It's your choice, of course. Remember, you can use the book to review for information if you need to. This is just kind of some information for you to keep, and you can review over this throughout the week. But we're on page 363 at the beginning of the end of World War II. We're going to look first at the war in Africa and Europe. In May of 1942, a team of Axis soldiers called the Afrika Korps swept across North Africa. Under the skilled leadership of General Erwin Rommel, the Afrika Korps marched across Libya and into Egypt. The Nazis were almost on the verge of seizing the Suez Canal, Britain's link to the oil reserves of the Middle East, when they began to run out of supplies, particularly fuel. The British staged a counteroffensive and Rommel was forced to retreat. British troops led by General Sir Bernard Montgomery pushed all the way to Tripoli in Libya. While the British were marching westward, American forces under General Mark Clark marched eastward from Morocco and Algeria. Rommel was caught in the middle of this offensive, and in May 1943, the Afrika Korps surrendered to the Allies. Now with North Africa secure other than Japan, there were no other Axis troops anywhere other than Europe. When the London Blitz had failed in 1940, you remember from yesterday's lesson, Hitler had unleashed his fury on the Soviet Union. And as a result, the Russians called upon their own allies to start a second front in Europe to divide Germany's forces. Plans were already being made for an Allied invasion of France, but Churchill suggested a third front, a strike at Germany through Italy, which Churchill called the soft underbelly of the Axis. The Allies in North Africa, just across the Mediterranean Sea from Italy, took advantage of their position and launched an attack in July 1943. The Italians, sensing that the end was near, removed Mussolini from power. The Allies captured Rome on June 4, 1944. A few months later, the Italian peninsula was freed from Nazi occupation. Meanwhile, the best military minds of the Allies planned an assault against Hitler's Europe. The invasion had to succeed. If not, the war might be lost. American General Dwight D. Eisenhower was chosen to head up the invasion. The Germans had heavily fortified the coast of France and were confident that any Allied attempt to invade Europe would fail. On June 6, 1944, the D-Day invasion began as thousands of Allied troops hit the heavily fortified beaches of Normandy in northern France, launching the largest amphibious assault or from ships and other seaborne vessels in history. While the shiploads of men crossed the English Channel, planes and gliders carried troops deeper into France. Within a few weeks, about 1 million Allied troops were fighting in northern France. Despite fierce opposition from the Germans, the Allies continued to push eastward. Every step forward brought them that much closer to Berlin. 20 days after D-Day, Cherbourg, France fell, giving the Allies a harbor where ships could bring men and supplies. The Allied invasion of France carried on with speed. With swift tanks, American armies under General George S. Patton and General Omar Bradley pushed the Germans back. By late August 1944, the Allies had liberated Paris. And from December 1944 to January 1945, the Germans launched their last great offensive in the West, known as the Battle of the Bulge. But after fierce fighting, the German effort failed, and the Allies began to race to Berlin. Allied bombing raids became more frequent as the Allies approached Berlin. Bombers knocked out German war factories and railroads, further weakening Germany's defenses. Earlier in the war, many German officers had decided that Hitler was a lunatic who was driving Germany toward ruin. Some of them felt that for Germany's sake, Hitler should be removed from the scene. On July 20 of 1944, a bomb exploded in Hitler's quarters, but the bomb failed to kill him. Hitler was enraged that his own generals had tried to kill him. Many executions followed. Even the well-known Rommel was forced to commit suicide for his part in the plot. From that time on, the German war effort deteriorated. And while this is going on, remember, Benito Mussolini, though he had been deposed, the end was still coming for him, though. The Italian patriots had captured Mussolini and shot him. An angry crowd kicked and spat upon the once powerful dictator. Then they hung his body upside down in the public square for all to see, to send a strong message to all other dictators around the world. Adolf Hitler lived like a mole 50 feet below Berlin in a bomb-proof bunker. He was a shattered man, his health and sanity falling fast. On April 30th, 1945, he commits suicide even as Russian troops were fighting in the streets of Berlin. On May 7th, 1945, Germany surrendered on what was known as VE Day. People everywhere celebrated, but the war was not quite over. Though the Axis powers of Europe had been defeated, Japan and the struggle in the Pacific was still going strong. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese swept across the Pacific, attacking Guam, Wake, and Midway, and other important American bases. After capturing Guam and Wake, the Japanese made an all-out attack on the Philippines. Despite a valiant effort by American troops, the island fell in early 1942. The fighting at Bataan and Corregidor was especially tragic. When surrender became unavoidable, President Roosevelt ordered General Douglas MacArthur to leave the Philippines so that he would not be captured. MacArthur escaped at the last possible moment when Bataan and Corregidor finally surrendered. Over 60,000 Americans became prisoners of the Japanese. These men were forced to walk 70 miles to prison camps. During the march, more than 10,000 American soldiers died either from hunger, from disease, or just from the pure physical strain. This was known as the Bataan Death March. This cruel march angered the Americans and made them even more determined to win a complete victory. Among those who shared that determination, none were more determined than General MacArthur. He had told the Philippines that I shall return as he was forced to flee. While the war in the Pacific was difficult and America lost many battles in the beginning, the territory, after all, we're fighting in is a vast ocean. We're not talking about just a giant landmass. We're talking about having to get from tiny island to tiny island to tiny island, which is known as island hopping, which we'll get to later. Here are some important battles, though, that happened during our war in the Pacific. The Battle of Coral Sea in May 1942. This is remembered as the first naval battle in history in which enemy ships never saw each other. The entire fight was done by planes. Next up was the Battle of Midway in June 1942. This crucial battle broke the back of the Japanese Navy. And in October 1944, as MacArthur had promised, he returns to the Philippines. And in the Battle of Leyte Gulf, Japan lost almost all of its remaining ships and planes. So, with that in mind, General MacArthur devises this strategy known as island hopping. Rather than take over every single island between here and Japan, you pick a strategic point, then hop from island to island to island, establishing bases along the way or supply chains until you get close to Japan. But island hopping was extremely deadly. The Japanese did not believe in surrender. You might be on an island with 1,000 Japanese, and maybe of the 1,000, 2 might surrender, which means that other 998, even if they're without guns, they're going to find some way to attempt to kill you. Made these battles extremely difficult because they believed they were fighting for their emperor, who was a god in their eyes. By April 1945, the Americans had to face a new threat from the Japanese called kamikazes. These pilots were unafraid of death, and rather than use guns, they used their planes themselves as missiles. While this is going on, though, President FDR is elected for his 4th term as president, but on April 12, 1945, he dies from a stroke. His vice president, Harry Truman, becomes president. And Truman learns of a secret that only the president and a few other men knew of, the atomic bomb, which was perfected in early 1945. And Truman had a decision to make. Should we send American troops, or should I use these bombs? And once his military strategist ran the numbers and he realized how much the loss of life would be if he had a full-scale land war in Japan, he drops 2 bombs, first on the city of Hiroshima, and within minutes, the city was wiped out and 90,000 people dead. But when the Japanese refused to surrender, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki where an additional 40,000 were killed. After this second bomb, the Japanese government surrenders. This is known as VJ Day on September 2nd, 1945. The aftermath, though, let's talk about this, because how destructive was World War II? Nearly 60 million people had died, and millions more were wounded, and many of them would die later from their injuries. But out of all of this, as we get into Germany, we learn about what was really going on with concentration camps, where over 6 million Jews were put to death by either gas, furnaces, and other heinous ways. And even some of them had even grislier fates. They would be experimented on like they weren't even human. And it was just, guys, it's a really gruesome scene. And it's something that we ought to always remember that happened in World War II. There was actually a Holocaust museum in Washington, D.C. that has some things in it that just, it really affects you when you see what humanity is capable of, the evil side. But after all of this, the results. Thanks to the Allies, World War II is over, and now Europe has to be rebuilt. And we're not going to leave it alone like we did in World War I. We're going to make sure that people like Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin can't rise to power again. And that includes 23.4. Once again, I wasn't able to talk about everything in this section. Make sure you read through the pages, and you have the section 23.4 review, evens only. Now, you won't have a video for tomorrow because it is Good Friday, so you guys enjoy this extended week and make sure you do your work. I'll see you later.